See, I catch you with these arms that hold me back against this wall. Release me from these chains, hold me fast. You see, there's a light at the end that I'm running to. If you hold my hand, then I'll show you there's a lot more waiting for us all at the end of the road.
How are you all doing tonight? Good. I'd like to start this evening by making a confession that I think will make me less popular with some of you. I can't stand watching musicals. Wow. Welcome to the search where preachers get heckled. There are a lot of movie genres that I tend to avoid. I don't like anything about a sports team. Any slasher films, gore, rom-coms where men have no spine, I avoid them all. But in theater and cinema, musicals are at the bottom of the barrel for me. It's not because musicals are unrealistic, though if I was walking through an American high school and everyone, students, teachers, custodians, and even the bus driver, broke into a song that had never been sung before, and they all knew the lyrics and accompanied it with impeccable dance choreography, I would be convinced that I was trapped in the dream world of Richard Simmons. I once watched Glee, and it gave me a stomach virus. There was a girl that I liked in college, and for weeks she tried to get me to watch Chicago. And finally, I was kind of trapped against my own will, and I actually stood up from the couch and ran out of the house without saying anything, and we haven't spoken since. I don't like musicals because I don't like the type of reality that they paint in which everyone has a singing or a dancing part, because reality just isn't like that. Some people never get to sing their song. In the nativity story, I have to admit, there's kind of a musical thing going on. Unexpected solos erupting out of nowhere. Mary belts out the Magnificat. An old man named Simeon, upon seeing Jesus in the temple, starts into an impromptu hymn of praise, now known as the Nunc Dimittis, popular in some classical operas. Mary's cousin Elizabeth even gets a chance to step on stage and offer a short tune, but it's her husband, Zechariah, who takes the spotlight and gives a startling performance of the Benedictus, whose final lyrics would make it into the Catholic Sanctus, sung at each Mass. There's a lot of singing going on. The closer that we get to Christmas, the more the story of Mary and her entourage looks like an episode of The Voice in rural Judea. The wise men from the east and the shepherds who have left their flocks, they might not have been given singing parts, but they would certainly have a little dancing to do. I don't know how that would look. The Magi tap dancing and jumping between wooden prop camels. The sheep herders swing dancing with notably coordinated sheep wearing green and red sequined vests that have magically discovered that they can do the jive on two hooved feet. Yes, I don't like to admit it. The nativity story is kind of a musical. But there's one notable exception. There is a wordless character on the stage, a muted performer with no lines and no lyrics. He fades into the stage's lifeless scenery, almost like the lifeless wooden cutouts of a theater set. It's Joseph, the husband of Mary. Joseph doesn't get a part in this soundtrack. All he has are really traumatic and uninvited dreams. In the first dream, an angel tells Joseph that the Holy Spirit has got his fiancée pregnant. Scoundrel. And that he won't even get to choose the child's name. Perhaps Joseph had daydreamed as a carpenter of building his firstborn son a crib, his name, a name of his choosing, etched into its wooden oak side, Clarence Reginald Christ. But no, it is not to be. If Joseph goes on Maury Povich for a paternity test, the test will be rather confused and its doctors quite anxious. Where did half of those chromosomes come from, and why are they glowing? Yet, this Jesus, according to the angel, will save his people from their sins, and Joseph should therefore continue with these marriage plans. In the second dream, the angel tells Joseph to take Mary and Jesus and flee off to Egypt from Bethlehem and remain until the angel gives any further instructions, because Herod is exterminating firstborns in order to eliminate a political rival that he has heard of, a toddler. In Joseph's third dream, an angel tells Joseph to return his family to Israel because Herod is dead and buried. However, Joseph hears that Herod's son Archelaus is still in power and reigning over Judea and is fearful to return home, rightfully so. In the fourth dream, God himself warns Joseph to avoid returning to Judea, and Joseph then settles Mary and Jesus in the region of Galilee, in Nazareth. Joseph doesn't get to choose his story. Have you? He has a wife who has, in some sense, had her marriage, her life, and her body hijacked for God's purposes, and no one has asked for her fiancé's permission. Joseph is not getting to write his part in the play. His story is one that he never would have authored and certainly would never have chosen freely. Joseph isn't given an option except to only submit to forces, political forces, divine forces, social forces, utterly outside of his control. You can't really call Joseph a hero. None of the gospel writers speak of Joseph in a way that gives him any explicit recognition. Joseph will get no mention from any epistle in the New Testament. Joseph is the Christmas story's unsung non-hero, not a recorded word, prayer, or hymn from his mouth. In Nativity, the musical, there are a lot of singers and dancers to be remembered, but there is one still character, his back against the curtains, simply submitting to the danger and risk and unknown of each unfolding act. The Christian tradition has assumed, and I think pretty reliably, that Joseph died before his son even began his ministry. The father that watched his almost kind of son take his first steps, word his first prayers, and celebrate his first birthday will never find out what will happen to this boy whose birth is heralded by an angel who walks in dreams. Joseph will never get a Dad of the Year award from the local synagogue's PTA board. He will never get to hear his firstborn Sermon on the Mount, never witness a healing, never get to see what it looks like for a toddler to grow into a liberator. Joseph is mute and powerless under the shadow of God. His faith receives no prayer or validation. He is a man that marries a young girl to save her from shame, escapes from a violent political regime across barbed wire borders with an undocumented God in the womb of his frightened teenage wife. We can try to put a mic up to Joseph's quivering lips and begin with a sultry jazz piano tune and invite him to sing, but the Christian tradition simply won't allow us that. Joseph is wordless, songless, being moved around in God's story, never knowing how it will end. His frail virtues are silent submission and an inaudible endurance. I don't know how 2012 went for any of you. We all experienced it in different ways. But 2012 for me was a year that I don't want to do again. Many of you might have also had a year in which the scenes that unfolded were painful and outside of your control. It was a story that you just had to submit to, but never would have chosen. A writer in a radical sect of the Baptist polity named Greg Williams wrote that Advent is the acknowledgement of the nativity story for people who are too depressed to celebrate Christmas. And I think that Joseph, his lips sealed, his dreams haunted, stands at the center of that sentiment. Joseph is not like the rabbi or the shepherds. He is not invited into the Christmas story. He is shoved in through the back doors, holding together a misfit family the best way a young husband knows how, and receiving not a word of historical memory to recount his strength or his hope. Joseph is the saint who met the grave with no acknowledgement or appreciation, and yet he rescues the mother of a Messiah from a brutal tyrant. Jesus might ultimately receive the coffee mug that reads "World's Best Son," but Jesus never lived to get the campy sweatshirt with the logo "Best Stepdad of the Messiah." And for those who feel thrown, much like me at the end of this year, into a life that we wouldn't have written for ourselves, perhaps there is comfort in knowing that a Joseph that is almost an invisible man is seen in the eyes of God. A Joseph who is visited by angels and ostensibly tells no one about it is participating in God's story, though he does not know if he will receive any reward for his faith. For those during Advent who feel that they are simply surviving while everyone else is thriving, if you feel punished looking at the highlight reels of everyone else's lives on Facebook while you're drowning in the secret struggles you can tell no one else about, one can remember that there is a forgotten saint, an essential character in the story of a king who never enters into the spotlight, but continues to love in the shadows while others sing at the top of their lungs. For those too depressed to celebrate Christmas, we have an embarrassed, shamed fiancé with no wedding photos or groomsmen moving through the Egyptian night, hoping that his wife and son will not be stopped by the authorities. Here at Christmas, it is a wordless Joseph that stands in the midst of all those whose pains go ignored and whose strength receives not a word of gratitude. Here, a new husband reminds us that the songs of despair or the songs of hope that no audience will ever get to hear is still heard and received in the heart of God, who will in the end offer a singing part to those who are hushed and made invisible by the powers of history. The muted will sing. The last will be made first. Those that were bent low will be lifted up. Mouths without a tune will claim their notes into a symphony of creation reconciled, and all will sing their part.
See, I catch you with these arms that hold me back against this wall. Release me from these chains that hold me fast. You see, there's a light at the end that I'm running to. If you hold my hand, then I'll show you there's a lot more waiting for us all at the end of the road.